Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining me on the highest level, and excited to chat with you about team building and your career. And you have a bit of an unconventional path. You were a baseball writer that became a baseball scout and now a front office executive with the Texas Rangers. So talk about the transition of writer to scout, and how do you learn to be a baseball scout?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on, and appreciate, just the interest in, in my path, and then the scouting industry. And I'm excited about having this conversation with you. I know we have a lot of things we share passion about. So I think like you said, I think the unconventional path for me is something that, in 2001, I started with Baseball America as a writer, and it was really my number one. Baseball is my passion, always since I was a little kid, and just absolutely loved watching it, writing about it, reading about it, thinking about it all the time, and of course playing. Um, but Baseball America specifically was what I was attracted to. It's what I wanted to do. I loved their style of writing, and I loved the fact that they were writing, especially at the time, about things that not everyone was writing about. Kind of pre social media, pre uh, the time where it was pretty easy for everybody to have a voice. So it was a magazine, and there was online, but the content was arriving every 2 weeks in your mailbox or at the bookstore and stuff like that. So I think that, but they were covering things that not everybody else was covering. You couldn't really get that information in your local newspaper, from the draft to minor league prospects, and that stuff just really fascinated me. Where these guys come from, what made them who they were, and learning about them before they became big leaguers, or if they didn't become big leaguers. What happened, like top prospect, top draft pick, all these guys that didn't make it, but you knew a lot about their story and their talent and everything. So I had that opportunity. For a few years. I was there at Baseball America. Just loving it, dream job, everything. And with part of that, you're, as a reporter, and meeting people, making connections, building relationships, and learning a ton about the game, and what scouts do, what executives do, how players think, all that stuff. And just naturally, through building some of those relationships in the scouting community and in front offices, the the offer came from the Padres uh, when an opening came up in the for an area scout job in the Mid Atlantic. The Padres offered me an opportunity there to be a scout, which it really wasn't something I had considered. It was loved what I was doing. I figured I'd continue on that path and have a career that I absolutely loved and challenged me in different ways. But I didn't play. I didn't coach. I didn't do those things that I thought, like, a scout would. Really, most scouts at the time did do. Had done before they became scouts. So it wasn't it wasn't really setting limits. I didn't even think of it as a possibility, and I was so focused on loving what I was doing that, um, I just continued along that path there. And um, so I think that, the second part of your question about how to learn how to become a scout, and I think, part of the reason that Chief Gayton was the Padres scouting director at the time, and I think part of the reason, uh, beyond, the fact that, like, we got to know each other and had a friendly relationship. I think the reason that he then and other teams since um, have targeted people in the media is because there is a big crossover between media reporting, writing, and scouting. You're interviewing people, you're seeking information, you're being resourceful, you're expressing and presenting your what you've learned. And then in scouting, like I said, you're seeking the truth and accuracy, and you're trying to learn as much as you can. You're trying to find these advantages to share information that otherwise might not be known. And so I didn't really realize that at the time, how much crossover there was. I thought it was, two different sides, because it's two different sides of the industry. But um, I quickly learned that my time at Baseball America was a great development grounds for scouting. I saw so much baseball, and I talked to people who saw even more baseball and knew, had spent their entire life in the game.
So that's really cool. I like the parallel of being a reporter and seeking information, and how that's really what you're doing in any type of scouting or recruiting, is trying to find information out about young men, young women. And was this kind of like on the job when you got into like an actual, like the San Diego Padres organization? Was this like on the job, like, here, we're just going to throw you in the Midwest and teach you along the way? Or did you have somebody that you were kind of learning underneath them? Just talk about how you were learning in that early stages of being a Major League Baseball scout.
Yeah, so I think the industry as a whole has done a better job, and the Rangers, I believe we do a better job of not just, hey, here's your stopwatch and radar gun, go get them. In 2004, when I took that job, though, there's a couple things. I started late January for the spring season, which was like hit the ground running. Here's kind of the pref list of players that you inherited, and go get them. And so it was definitely on the job learning. There was things that that people with the Padres were helping me learn, and guiding me. But there was a lot of the basics of, there's a lot of basics that were challenging to learn on your own, and you learn by making mistakes, and um, and and really, like, the other, I think the other part was, our when you go to work as an area scout, you're with the 29 other clubs, so they're your competition, but they're also your coworkers on a daily basis, in a way, right? You're sitting next to them, you're talking to them, you're overlapping and crisscrossing your territory with them constantly. So again, naturally, the relationships develop, and the without sharing proprietary information, there's so many ways that, guys are looking out for each other. One scout in particular, Brian Barber, he pitched he pitched in the big leagues in the 90s, and he was a scout for the Yankees at the time. And we lived close together, and we just, kind of became friends. And he was so instrumental and influential for me in learning some of those little things on, just the basics of things that I would overlook otherwise. When you get to the ballpark, where, when do you kind of stake your claim to your spot behind home plate or down the line? When all those little things that, I remember one of my first games I went to, and, I got to, it was at Old Dominion University, and they didn't have stands behind home plate, and I'm there watching a pretty prominent starting pitcher at the time that did go really high in the draft. And he, and you get there, and there's no stands behind the plate, so there's just a backstop and flat ground. And and all of a sudden you realize there's 40 or 50 scouts here, and I'm boxed out by many of them who are taller than me, or just the fact you're on, flat ground. You're trying to find angles and all that. So it wasn't even just a matter of get there early. It was get there early, find a spot, establish, so those basics, I think, were things that were constantly kind of a little bit of trial and error. How do you, back in 2004, without having as much easy access to some of the ways we communicate now, how to find out, like, confirm, is the pitcher that you want to see, is he starting, is the game played on time, is the weather going to be okay? All those things were things that Brian and then other coworkers with the Padres were really helpful with. When it came report writing too was something where the feedback loop is a little quicker maybe than some of those examples I just gave, because you see a player, do your work, kind of do your homework, and then write them up, send in the report, and you get feedback from the front office, from the scouting director a little quicker. So all those things went into it, and then the feedback loop of like really calibrating your scouting scale takes years, and honestly, I mean, it's still have a foundation of what I view as average, elite, above average, below average, poor, but it's always a kind of an evolution process too.
And do you remember anything from this time? Because I would think coming in as a writer, you maybe had certain ideas of what made up a great player. And I can only imagine that this was a time of great growth for you in terms of your understanding of player evaluation and what led to success for Major League Baseball players. Do you remember anything specific that changed from what you thought made a great player before, and then changed once you became a scout?
Yeah, definitely. The one of the bigger differences. So we talked a lot about the similarities between going from writing to scouting. As a writer, the level of accountability was high because I put my name. You have a byline, you put your name on it, and I think it still exists out there somewhere. So there's accountability, but um, there's also I could be very aggressive in terms of how I viewed players, how I projected players, and maybe optimistic, maybe overly optimistic about when I write up a player for Baseball America. It was um, maybe on the extreme ends, even if there was a player that was maybe a little overhyped, and I didn't think so. So I think the extremes were there. So I think I had developed a tendency um, to write about like a lot of pluses in the tool set, and then use the top of the scouting scale like very very freely. So I think as I transitioned, all of a sudden it's one thing to go out and kind of like players and see what they're capable of. I think it's great to have that mindset that you want to see the potential in them that obviously that maybe others don't. But I think if I realize at some point through the spring when you get feedback from the cross checkers that come in, and different types of feedback there, I think that you would realize that maybe I'm on the high end of grading, and again that's that calibration process. So there was a couple times that maybe the feedback was it was very humbling, maybe embarrassing at times too, where you'd be you'd see a player that I thought I really liked, I thought had those tools and skills to be a good big league player. And somebody with more experience, cross checker, would come in and be like, you sure you sure about this guy? Like, they have this bigger lens, this bigger perspective, seeing the entire country for years to kind of say no. Now that's a I think in those examples were ones where like they were right. I was way off. I was maybe creating something that wasn't there, because there's this kind of dream that I would have of like what's my vision for scouting. You're going to go out and you're going to find these players in the sticks that nobody else had ever seen or nobody knew about, and it's going to be that I thought was scouting, right? I read a dollar sign on the muscle and books like that where it's glorified in my mind, those examples exist out there. You do your work, you can, even to this day with all the information, you can still identify players, identify something in players that nobody else has seen. It just wasn't around the corner every day. And I think that, like, as I said, it was easy for me to unknowingly sort of try to create um, a little more than was actually there until I would have those moments where you just got checked a little bit, and it was embarrassing, but it wasn't like major setbacks.
Not major setbacks, and also, quite honestly, a great way to learn. I can think of numerous examples in my career recruiting football players where same thing. I either didn't believe that a certain player had the makeup to be successful, or I was very confident that a certain player had the ability to be successful. And the result of that thinking kind of shaped me along the way as well. And it sounds like you too. Talk, because in your role currently with the Texas Rangers as the assistant general manager, part of your role is hiring and developing scouts. What type of skill set are you looking for when you're hiring a scout? And what do you think makes a successful scout in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one we've worked more and more to define here in recent years. As the industry's evolved, and analytics and um, more and more things have come into play in how we evaluate players outside of just go to the ballpark and see player, write report, and use your instincts. So those things are still important, but there's so much more to putting the entire picture together. It's such an ongoing process. So with that said, I think um, we're looking for competitive people who are passionate about baseball, about scouting, about being able to be a part of a team that contributes to ultimately winning a championship by getting high character, high makeup, talented players who drive value for the organization. I think that I think one of the things that is we look for and try to develop once we have people in on staff is a growth mindset that they're hungry to learn. They're constantly seeking ways to develop their craft, and exploring. They're very curious, so they're asking a lot of questions. Go back to what we talked about with the reporter and scout parallels there, that that curiosity that drives, let's get past the surface level, what everyone can see when there's talent, and how do we drill down deeper. And I think there's so many branches off of what the skills a scout needs to have, from how to identify the tools and talent and the mechanics, and then before you even get into makeup and then the psychology of the player, there's just so many different angles to go, and then develop your skill sets in each of those a little bit further. So those are things. I think being objective, and being able to present the information, communicate effectively, build networks of in your whatever domain. If you're an area scout or a pro scout or in the front office, those things, and being able to develop and cultivate those networks. And then of course judgment. Not just the instinctive intuition and kind of old school experience of being out there, but judgment of the everyday decisions that we make, whether that's a recommendation at the end of the day, but it's all the decisions and the judgments you make leading up to the ultimate recommendation and decisions.
Yeah, and you talked about obviously the ongoing continuous learning that's going to happen really with any profession. Is there anything specific? I mean, we're here in the second year, almost the end of year two of kind of COVID and dealing with a lot of virtual world. And I'm sure that affects recruiting tremendously. Is there anything that you guys have been working on as a staff to develop here over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly given us a lot of time to be able to do that. Like probably everybody else in the world, we zoomed like crazy, and a year ago. But what that allowed was, there's probably Zoom overload and Zoom fatigue and everything. But there's also, if we, when we did it with the intent to learn and grow and develop, we're also like, how do we communicate effectively as a group um, to strive towards those shared goals, and that are shared, and share our values in our approach there. So
Let me ask you this, because it kind of leads into my next question,
yeah,
is just about talent evaluation as a whole, and looking at it from an organizational standpoint. You talked about having shared values in a shared vision. And I'm just curious how the overall organizational goals and vision leads directly into the talent evaluation approach and process.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a big picture standpoint, we're trying to build sustainable championship, World Series organization. I think, we're trying to do it with people who are, competitive, good teammates who, we're all, everybody looking out for each other, but also in an environment where we can challenge each other. And so that's where I think the environment starts to take shape and builds a culture. How our behaviors, how we act and treat each other every day, leads to actually what the culture is, and works towards our mission of achieving, World Series, and staying at that top level in a highly competitive industry. I think that when it comes to player evaluation, the more we understand the people who are in it, from our coaching staff to Chris Woodward as a manager, Chris Young and John Daniels, the more we understand each other, I think it does allow us to understand what type of makeup we're looking for in players. So when that part of the player evaluation piece for me is that, it's one thing where, talent and skill, and then makeup. I think that as we work to, there has to be like a certain level of talent to play in the big leagues. The but that alone is not is not nearly enough to keep you there, or to get you there, even in some cases. So it's I think we're so confident that the makeup elements and the traits of drive and the commitment to the passion that these players have, that keeps them going, and then their resilience, those factors, and then all the different characteristics that go into making up those traits, are the things that we're just constantly digging for. And then the more we know about those things, the more we know about what a player's been through, who he is, the more we can try to understand and get closer to, projecting what he's going to be in the future. And the character traits are part of that as well. Just what kind of teammate, what kind of professional, how mature, those things. I think we've separated a little bit of the drive and commitment, resilience, from the character part. Just to we want good people, but that edge, that the drive and passion and competitiveness, it's not either or. Hopefully it's both. And then the more we understand about who we are as an organization, to who we are as a major league team, the more you can, then the team building part of it comes into play. It's not just one single profile that fits in, and all 26 players are going to be exactly the same, check every single box. It's going to be, well, you have certain, it's going to be give and take on, not give and take, but there's going to be different levels of those. And then as the stronger we are as a culture and environment, with the core of the team checking most of those boxes at a really high level, then the more you can take on maybe a little bit more talented player who, is in the middle in some of those areas. Because then hopefully we take him from the middle to a notch above. And I think those things are that's where I think the mark of like a championship organization really comes into play, um, as we bring those together. Because if you're as an area scout or a pro scout and player acquisition, you're out and you're identifying these these tools and skills and traits of players, and it's just, you know you can get into kind of evaluating them in a vacuum, but ultimately, like when we bring them into our environment, then the question of like, all right, how do they fit with what we're doing, comes into play.
Yeah, and I've seen this too in my study of championship teams. Is they have a clear vision for what they want to be as a team, and they match that specifically to their talent evaluation process. And it's like you said, it's a fluid situation with every single player evaluation, but you're making those decisions that's directly aligned with the type of team that you want to have. And you mentioned drive, and I had written down that, from a football perspective, it's very intense. A lot of the time, baseball, from my outside perspective, seems fun. Like it's like the players are always kind of like playing pranks on each other. It just seems like a very fun atmosphere. And I know there's obviously hard work involved, but specific to what you just talked about with the drive, how do you find out whether a player has that drive to be great and put in the work and do the mundane things day after day, versus just enjoying being a ball player?
Yeah, I think it's in their actions and their behaviors. So if we're talking about players for the draft, and our scouts have, pretty good access to asking these questions, and of, directly to a player, trying to ask the right questions, trying to really get at the root of what does drive them, what are they motivated by. I think that, and then it's not just about what does the player tell you, but then as a scout, you're looking for, are the things that you believe as a scout and the players telling you, are they consistent with his actions? Do the coaches and his teammates and the trainers, do they say that, yes, he's first in, last out, the cliche. But if like, does his passion show up in commitment? Does that intrinsic motivation show up by consistently doing the training, putting in the work? And I how do they talk about their love and passion for the game? But ultimately, how does it show up, right? Because I think it can show up. It's not just the words. I think that's the most important thing, is that, in whatever form of evaluation we are we're in the process of, is like a constant validation or verification of, okay, we learned this about player. Hey, that sounds good. Now let's check it. Is it the same tomorrow? Is it the same? Does he show up the same after a bad game, a bad week? Those kind of things. So I think that, how prepared they are and it goes back to like, even just, we were talking about in the scouting world with learning and growth. But if you're truly driven and passionate about the game of baseball, and driven to compete, driven to win, driven to be the best, whatever drives you, are you putting in are you seeking out different resources? There's so many, like, guys, no matter where players are in the country, no matter what organization they're in, what high school, it's incredible. You can go on YouTube, you can go on wherever you want to go, and find experts in a field of, the nuances of the game, of skill development. And it's, so I think, what are their actions and habits doing that support the drive and the passion that we're looking for.
And when we're talking about building a team, obviously a lot of what you're discussing is both considering the talent which you need, but also kind of these unseen characteristics. And I'm just curious how much of a discussion a player's fit within a certain team culture or maybe a certain system plays into the talent evaluation. In baseball, how important is a player's fit within that team and system?
Yeah, it is. It can range from very significant. I think a lot of things are going to depend on what's the acquisition cost, right? If we're picking at the top of the draft and it's or we're making a trade that has major um, significant consequences, right? It's a valuable asset, and we're acquiring talent in return. I think as in reference to makeup and fit, I think the higher the makeup, I think we both believe this, right? The more boxes someone checks, the higher they are, the closer they are to that elite makeup, competitive makeup that we're seeking. I think the more likely they are to get the most, even more out of their talent and their ability. So when I think of that in terms of fit, I think there's a lot of different ways for a player to fit. If we're acquiring a player for the major league roster, um, again, what are the team dynamics already in place? What is leadership in the clubhouse like? Because it's also fragile too, and I've got dog appearance here. It can be fragile too. So I think a high awareness of of again, like, evaluating where you're at currently, knowing who leadership is, understanding those factors and traits are those factors at play. I think it allows you to make some of those determinations on fit. But baseball different. I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on the same question in football, but in baseball, where it's on the field, you can have there's a lot of individual one-on-one battles going, right? Whether it's pitcher to hitter, obviously, but the right fielder out there, or the reliever that's in the bullpen pitches 1 inning or 2 innings a night. Um, there's things that aren't going to be a major impact on the club in certain roles, as long as the core of the team is in a good spot, right? That does really, quote unquote, fit, and is in line with the things that we really value. I think fit, when it is a core piece of a team, or again at the top of the draft, for us, it's really significant that we are not going to be willing to take or make sacrifices on some of those elements that we really believe strongly are going to contribute to a championship organization.
Yeah, and my experience in football is, and I always look to kind of the people that are doing it best. And so just like two examples that I've done a lot of research and writing on is Pete Carroll with the Seattle Seahawks and Bill Belichick with the New England Patriots. And so kind of the reason I was asking about the overall philosophy of the organization is kind of comes from this. You look at someone like Pete Carroll, very competitive, and competition has been at the central theme of both his time at USC and his time at Seattle. I've even heard him talk about, I didn't know how to coach until I got fired from the New England Patriots and took a year off of football to kind of cement my philosophy. And I think what he meant was he didn't have a clear vision for who he wanted to be as a leader and what he wanted his team to be. Like, how are you going to win? And so I think like there's a philosophy of what type of organization you want to have, but I think there's also a team identity, which relates specifically to, this is how we're going to win. We're going to get, and for Pete Carroll's instance, we're going to get competitive people in here. And, the best example is they go out and spend $30 million in the offseason to get all of these. I think they acquired like 3 different free agent quarterbacks, and they draft Russell Wilson in the 4th round. And probably have no idea what they're really drafting. They just feel like, well, we have to find a quarterback, so let's definitely spend a draft pick. And for them to make the decision, I mean, it was really like a watershed moment in that organization's history. And a lot of leaders don't want to do that because I just spent $30 million on all of these players and I'm going to look like an idiot. No, you're really going to look like an idiot in 3 years after you get fired from starting 4 of those different quarterbacks. The right decision was to go with that right type of player. And a lot of people don't want to do that. And I think, again, it goes back to the central team identity that they wanted it to be competitive. They found the ultra competitive leader for their team as a rookie, and they really like went all in on that. And specifically to Bill Belichick, it's really interesting because he routinely has had this sustained run of success. And we don't have to get into like, is it Tom Brady or Bill Belichick? I believe it's a combination of the two. But like specifically, Bill Belichick and that organization has done an unbelievable job of taking players that were deemed maybe like they were cut by other teams. They weren't really seen as talented players or NFL starters, and they've put them in roles within that organization that makes them successful. And I think a lot of this goes back to what do they want to be as a team? They have a very clear identity of what they want to do as a team, specifically not lose games. They played a game like 3 weeks ago in like 40-mile-an-hour winds, and I think they threw the ball like 3 times. It was like the least amount of throws in the last like 30 years of an NFL game. And everybody's laughing and they don't trust their quarterback. I look at it from the coach's perspective, which is no, they went into that game knowing they were going to deal with a once in a blue moon type weather situation. And they thought they could run the ball on the Buffalo Bills, which they did, and they won the game. And that was one game. Like that does not have any bearing on what they're going to do in the future, what they're going to do next week. The singular focus was on winning that game. And I think that permeates through that entire organization and through their talent evaluation. And they just do a really good job of saying, well, I don't care that this guy can't do this skill, and this skill, but he does have this singular ability, and this will make him great within our system. So obviously I get super fired up and passionate about this, but those are the kind of examples that I think of when it comes to football.
Yeah, the things that I love that one, I think that I don't know when like you said, the Brady Belichick's innovation and his ability to whether it's one game like that or it's season to season, his ability to innovate and adapt to the players that were around Brady, different players year to year, and what they have now is incredible, right? And seeing those opportunities, I think the things that I hear too, and I have both books from both those guys on the bookshelf over here too, and it's like what those two have in common, what Bill Walsh to what I think the best organizations in baseball, what we're striving for, is that I think at the core they've defined, especially Pete Carroll in that epiphany type moment, of really, I think starting looking from within first and defining his philosophy personally, doing some really, really deep work to get there. And then Belichick, like I think there's like some uncompromising principles that you can have when you have established at the core, the foundation. We know what we're trying to do. We know who we are, and then you can build off of that, right? Then you can innovate a little bit here. Then you can make those tough decisions. Russell Wilson over the guy they had signed as a free agent for a lot of money, and because it starts with like how clearly they've defined what they want to be, the identity that you mentioned, and those things. And I feel like that's like what I think is missed a lot of times when people talk about Belichick in particular, is that, you know, if there's when there's a narrative of, well, they'll take on anybody to win, when they've taken some guys that had those character issues in other organizations. But what I understand about it is, yes, of course, they've taken on players with elite ability, can do things on the field, but they're not willing to sacrifice. Like, those guys have to come in and buy in, which to me means they're there to win, to compete, to do the things that are required to be a patriot at like a ridiculously high level for 20 years. Um, so, again, thinking about that with us is, what are those uncompromising things? What does it mean to buy in? What does it mean to compete? Pete Carroll and compete, and like, I love, the environment they've developed there with with every corner you turn in the building and outside, it's like competitive, 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 and it translates to Sundays and all that. That's the idea, right? I think that, what, as we talk about player makeup, identifying players that, fit into our organization in the minor leagues, or, ultimately in the big leagues, like, what does it mean to compete though? Is it, it's easy to see a guy on the field, with intensity and, in big moments here and there, the emotional reaction they show. But what are they doing? This goes back to like your question on drive a little bit. What are they doing in between games? What are they doing when the fans aren't there, when they're not on TV? Or what are they doing to compete in the weight room? What are they doing to compete to get a little bit better than their competition? And so anyway, we could, the those two guys, you could obviously just we talk about for hours, and there's so many different um, elements of what they do that are the reasons that made them so successful for so long. But I think it starts with like that clarity of defining what they're trying to do at the
Yeah.
start.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what always just kind of was like, very telling that here's Pete Carroll has been an NFL head coach for two organizations, and kind of makes that statement that, like, I didn't really know how to coach until I got fired from my second head coach, position. And it just kind of cemented for me the importance of it's not just about acquiring talent. You have to acquire talent with a purpose. You have to find the right players. It's not finding the best players. And I'm curious for you, like when you're scouting in person, and you talked about the drive and kind of this desire to continually improve and aim higher. How are you looking beyond the game? Whether it's watching a player as he's interacting during a game or between innings, or maybe it's interviewing or talking to these players as you build those relationships. What are you looking for beyond the game?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the on the field part is significant, right? But it's for me, that part of the evaluation is incomplete until we start to put some of the pieces together beyond that. Which, and so I think interviewing the player, the family, the coaches. But so what do we see on the field? How do they look? What are their mannerisms? Um, what do they look like competing? What do they look like in between innings? Each of those may mean nothing, or they may mean something. And especially those little things that you take note of, if you're those should lead to like the questions that we ask, or they're verifying, validating like things that we've asked previously, or that we've, another scout has seen. And, hey, this is his behavior on the field this day was not consistent with what I'd heard coming in, or what he told us, or what a coach who's telling you what you want to hear, type of thing. Like when his behavior is not matching up, his actions not matching up with the words, or it is. So to me, it's like from the second you lay eyes on them when they step on the field, what are their habits? What are their routine? Are they taking it serious? How do they interact with their teammates? Um, are they how are they preparing to compete? And again, those little things may mean nothing, but over time, as a staff, collectively, we start to compile those nuggets of intel and then bring them together, right? Because
Yeah.
if we're looking for perfect player that every single step of the way they did everything right, we're gonna have a very short list. But consistent habits over time, consistent progress in improving habits that lead to performance over time, um, those things I think will show up. So um, again, I think um, it's really just putting all those together. Um, uh, Again, I think about, a year ago we took Jack Leiter in the draft at the top of the draft. Vanderbilt starter. The program is unbelievable there in terms of how they run it, how they develop their young men to be professional and to be prepared to compete. And one thing our scouts talked about throughout the spring, seeing him is, basically from the second he steps on the field, there's a routine and this serious, intense focus that is consistent every single time. And then you see it on the mound. Um, as much as he dominated, you got to see some of those moments where um, he was challenged. And I think um, that maybe is important as anything we can see. A lot of scouts will see the worst start or worst performance of the year, and they're glad they did. They want to see how did somebody respond. So as last year with Leiter kind of cruising along and really dominating, throwing back-to-back no hitters and all this stuff. It's like, all right, what about when he gets challenged? What about when the defensive error behind him, or the call from an umpire doesn't go the right way, or he gives up a home run and they're down, I think you're down 3-0 in a game, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, now all the work preparation, his mindset, all the things that we believe about him, this is when we need to see it show up as much as any, because it's only going to get harder and more challenging, right? After we draft him every step of the way in the minors to the big leagues, and he just consistently showed that, stepped up, responded over and over and over.
Yeah, I mean, I love like starting to talk about this because uh, it's not only those moments of adversity, which I know are like incredibly key in determining, okay, does this player have the makeup to just continue, like like the resilience to continue coming at attacking the problem, but it's also seen in those moments when they throw the no hitter. Like, it's not the moment that they throw the no hitter. That's great. That's really kind of indicative of their ability and their talent. But what time do they show up at the facility the next day? I always remember Kobe talking about winning a champion. He had just won his like third or fourth championship. And somebody was asking him, like, oh, well, what did you do? Did you go to St. Bart's? Did you like go to Italy with your wife? And he was like, no, I woke up at 4 a.m. the next day when it worked out. Right. And it's like, oh, you didn't even have like a pancake breakfast like to celebrate. It's like, no, I like went right back into the gym. And I think like it's both the moments of adversity and those moments of success to know like ultimately, okay, is this player that has success at 18 years old going to be that type of player that's going to be kind of at the top of our farm league and our farm system in 3-4 years.
No question. I think it's one of the biggest indicators of future success and continued performance and growth is like how much insight can we get into those moments of adversity, that moments of not big trauma. It doesn't have to be big trauma, but it's there's plenty of moments in sports, no matter who you are, that you're being challenged. You're constantly being challenged, right? And
Right.
I think that, and then there's Kobe and Brady and Jordan and these guys who are already at elite levels, and they find whatever things they need to like put a chip on the shoulder when what they just created it, which is absolutely incredible, right? I think I like what you said too, though, about what about how they handle success? What can we learn about them when things are going easy? You know, and it's kind of a theoretical thing, but like some of these high school players who have dominated every single step of the way, and haven't really faced adversity. What can we learn about them though from how they've handled success? Because if it's been easy, I would question like what level of success have they really had? If they've performed at really elite levels against the best competition in the country consistently, that should be really challenging, right? To have done that. So yes, they may have continued to succeed. Maybe they always come out on top. They're number one, this, that, and whatever. But they've had moments where they've been challenged and succeeded that may not be viewed as failure, but again, how have they responded in those moments? Do they, the ego get involved and they back off a touch, um, or are they built, like to sustain this for the long haul, but it makes them even hungrier and they want more and they want to stay at that level. And, and you can tell like, some of these players where they have, again, with Leiter being such a good example, his passion for pitching, competing, winning, and ultimately being great is so apparent that I think whether he's having success or when he gets challenged, I think how he's going to respond is going to be very similar in both cases. What do I need to do to get better to either stay here at this level, or which means getting better, not just staying there, right? Or what do I need to do to respond to, hey, my fastball, my slider isn't where it needs to be. He was tweaking pitches in the middle of absolutely dominating the SEC. So those kind of things I think are such good indicators of what we're trying to do, project out 5 to 8 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier about coming from winning programs and having those routines or knowing what it takes to be successful. And I'm glad that you said that too, because I think this is a really interesting piece. I mean, obviously I spent time in the NFL and in college football. You look at a team like the University of Texas, they have all the talent in the world, and they haven't been able to really have a whole lot of success over the last 10 years. And you could even make an argument like underperforming the previous 10 years under Mac Brown when they were a really good program. And I think a lot of this is because those players have such success. And Texas is one of those elite programs that is pulling the best of the best. And a lot of times they haven't faced that adversity. They have been dominating the competition. And it's interesting how, specifically back to Bill Belichick pulls a lot of his players from like the same programs. Like he's pulling them from the University of Iowa, the University of Alabama, Rutgers, back when Coach Schiano was the head coach there. And he was asked about it, and he was talking about how those players not only understood what it was to be coached hard, which again is in direct alignment with like that coach's style and their program philosophy, but also that they understood what it was going to take to be a professional player, which obviously this is around a lot of what we're talking about. Like when we hand this person $1 million check at 18 years old or 22 years old, how are they going to respond? Well, there's no 100% way to determine that. But I think what we're talking about is kind of reducing the uncertainty of kind of and really getting to the core of who that person is. And like you said, when they're dominating the SEC, are they just like making sure their Instagram brand is like on point? Or are they back in the lab the next morning, like making sure that they're continuing to evolve? Awesome stuff.
I love that. Like about, I think first thing I think of with that Belichick example is, I think also he has that back to the clarity of knowing what he wants, what fits, obviously knowing his coaching style. And in the NFL, the one piece where I'd say like the difference for NFL, NBA, compared to us in the draft is, they basically need to perform right away, right? You got to for the most part, like you're going to be a part of the team next year for the Patriots. You get drafted. Where Leiter, we hope and expect and fully expect him. He's going to get there quickly, but he's going to go through the minor leagues like everyone else. Also, um, as you go to players that maybe aren't at a great program, I think that we have a little more time and runway to develop players in our system. So I think there's potential outside of the big the SEC, the big conferences. Outside of some of those, there's potential to see more opportunity in what we can still develop, right? If maybe they've been underdeveloped, maybe we don't think it's the greatest program, maybe they haven't been coached hard and they haven't been exposed to anywhere close to the resources that we now have. So is that because they lack something internally to push them to go seek it, or is that a huge opportunity for us to go, oh man, like he's already capable of doing X, Y, and Z, and he's been in this program with a total lack of resources, or maybe a coaching philosophy that we just it differs from ours. I think, can we bring that player into our system and then really capitalize and take advantage of that? And I think with some 3, 4, 5 years in the minor leagues, like a lot can change if we're hitting if we have our philosophy and our core principles like defined as clearly as we need to, then there's just so much room for bringing in some of those underdeveloped players and making the most out of it.
Yeah, I remember I was speaking with Kennedy Palomalu, who is the running backs coach for the Minnesota Vikings. We worked together at UCLA, and I was kind of asking him about a lot of the same conversation and questions we're having right now. And he talked about, that's why it's important to find out all these little things in between the game, find out about the person and understanding their story, is because sometimes they may not have access to additional training or access to a weight room in the off season, and understanding that, like, is it a result of their own actions, or is it a result of their circumstance and situation? And I guess, like, just in terms of decision making, I wanted to ask you about, like, when you make exceptions. And I guess that goes both ways. Maybe exceptions on, like, wow, the talent is just so overriding at this value, like we have to do this. Or, the other way too, where it's like, man, he doesn't have the measurables. He doesn't have maybe that skill that we're really looking for, but these other things and this history of success just make it so we just want this guy on our team. Just talk about, like, when you make exceptions in the decision-making process.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what is the acquisition cost. So again, if it's huge dollars in free agency, probably shouldn't be making too many exceptions. If it's the top of the draft, if it's those top few rounds in the draft, we're not going to be making too many exceptions one way or the other, where we're hey, let's kind of punt talent or makeup, and just like there has to be there's certain thresholds that have to be above the higher the acquisition cost. Major trades, things like that. But as you slide further down there, then deeper into the draft, you're not going to be taking players. Most likely you're not going to be finding players who are ticking the top of the box in those areas. So, but you can find extremely talented players who maybe have a little yellow flag in a different area. Maybe they, even if that's just like the skill to really play the game, just they haven't been exposed to it yet. It's a little more raw ability wise, or it's makeup wise. It's immaturity, not a like lack of competitive drive is really hard to overcome and develop. I think if that's you have to drag somebody out to the field, that's probably an exception that would be pretty rare, if at all, for us to make. But if it's immaturity and they've had some instances where maybe they didn't respond the way we hope they will after development and continued growth, and then vice versa, right? the player's really skilled, not the most talented, but just the like hungriest, most driven, committed guy, willing to do whatever. And next thing you know, climbs the ladder, continues to overachieve. The classic grinder, overachiever sort of profile. I mean, the deeper you get in the draft, there's opportunities for that as well. I just think it's risk. It's a constant risk assessment, and that's why the acquisition cost comes in so much into play there.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I mean, you see this at the same thing happens with the NFL draft, right? Like the first round draft picks are such a premium in terms of assets for team building. And yeah, 50% of the first round draft picks are pretty much out of the league in 3 years. Like you said, you kind of have to be ready to produce or else. And it would make sense that kind of a higher makeup, a higher importance on character would translate to more success with those high acquisition costs. We could get even deeper into team building and scouting, and we might just have to shelve that for episode number 2. But I did want to touch on one thing. I grew up here in Dallas, and obviously I've always been a Texas Rangers fan. And you've been with the team for a good amount of time now, and the team experienced a lot of success at the beginning of the last decade, going to 2 World Series appearances. And I just want to kind of take you back and just see if you could give us any insight as to like, what was it about that team that separated them? Was it just like an accumulation of a lot of talented players that all got along? Was there a chemistry aspect? Was it, the leader and Coach Washington just really having kind of the right effect with the right combination of players? Just kind of tell us about what stood out to those World Series teams, and what do you remember about kind of the culture makeup at that point?
Yeah, so I came in 2008 into a pro scouting role in the front office. So it was, JD, John Daniels, AJ Preller, Thad Levine had already, the building blocks had already been in motion, from the big Mark Teixeira trade the summer before I got there that brought in Elvis and Saltalamacchia, Matt Harrison, and Neftali Feliz, and guys that became like really, really instrumental in those World Series teams. But so and then we made some other major acquisitions with Josh Hamilton and Cliff Lee and those guys along the way. But it was an extremely talented team, and I think it would be easy, and it was easy at the time to really just focus on like how much talent we had. But the makeup of that club, led like Ron Washington's energy and passion for the game was just like infectious for everyone. I think that his style certainly it was perfect for that team with Michael Young as kind of the leader of the clubhouse, that consummate professional, that those things balance each other in some ways, with Michael's approach and credibility, and then Wash really putting players in position to feel free to be themselves, and ultimately, like, it seemed like all these guys having monster years together, which was not coincidence at all, so. But you can't overlook the makeup components, I think, of what, from Nelson Cruz, who was a late bloomer, and acquired in a trade with the Brewers as really, kind of one of the secondary players in that trade initially. He comes on to be, middle of the order run producer, to Josh Hamilton. Obviously, his story, like, well documented, but his ability to fit in with that club, with the leadership of Michael and Ian Kinsler and that group, I think was, those things that can't be overlooked, that Josh was put in a position to be unstoppable at times, with a support staff around him that allowed it. It wasn't just the sort of the accountability coach that Josh had throughout his career. It was his teammates. Those guys cared for each other, like, and they had so much fun. and as talented as we were in 2010, 11, we weren't yet just, wasn't yet just, steamrolling the league. It was still like this foundation of a young up and coming team. We talked sometimes that 2012 team that fell short after the two World Series clubs, maybe even more talented and than the first two, and just didn't quite get there. Um, but yeah, the energy. I think about the first thing I always think of just the energy, the passion, how much fun they had, and obviously how much fun it was to watch them. But and then also on the, from the inside, just really getting a front row seat to watch, JD kind of orchestrate the moves to build that club, and then the coaching staff just kind of taking it from there to put those players in the position they did. It was an extremely fun time, and I think we're building something now that's similar to rival that with the farm system we have on the way. Obviously, the resources from ownership, the investments we just made here recently at the free agency level, and the ballparks, the facilities, all that. It's an exciting time that definitely kind of conjures up memories of 2008 and 9 building up to the 10-11 World Series.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like you said, the new stadium and obviously a lot of the acquisitions that have been made recently by the team. Just curious, is it like, are you guys trying to replicate the same formula from what you had success with early on, or does it kind of evolve as different players mature and develop? Just kind of talk about if you guys are trying to replicate that same formula.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes and no. I mean, there was, the window. The yes part is obviously like they were extremely talented and successful, and they performed. And like I said, the makeup components that you add in there, um, the the I think there was some creativity in how those teams were built. Taking on players like Hamilton, Nelly Cruz, and so on. I think those some of those principles at the foundation are similar, and what we want to acquire, but the game has evolved so much um, that it's different in most other ways. I mean, there's so much more information available, the way that players are developed, the access they have to being able to, go into a biomechanics lab, and the feedback loops on the adjustments they can make are going to be so much quicker. So I know that kind of gets off into like how, we're developed, not necessarily, you know, replicating those teams, but I think the entire process in the industry has changed so drastically from '08, 9, 10 that those same advantages and opportunities aren't there in the way they are now. So, um, and if you do kind of step back and look at it, we're again that Mark Teixeira trade in 2007 was an opportunity to bring in like a huge haul of talent, and then some of the other trades along the way, building up, Volquez for Josh Hamilton. The talent acquisition process that we were in position to sort of, quote unquote, rebuild back then to build towards that team, and where we got to in the last several years, picking higher in the draft and taking advantage of it with, Cole Winn to Josh Young to Jack Leiter, to the trades of a bunch of players here recently to bring in players that we think will have a chance to be the core of the next team. I mean, at that level, from maybe 30,000 feet, like we have similar opportunities in talent acquisition because of where we're at in the cycle of a window of opportunity, and building towards next season and then 23 and beyond. I think that the buildup is similar because we have these opportunities to really go out and cash in on draft picks, trades, and free agency all at the same time. So that's where the overlap is. But again, I can't emphasize enough like how much just the whole landscape of the game and player evaluation has changed in those 14 years.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned, or Moneyball had come out kind of at the beginning of the millennium, I think the early 2000s. And, obviously at that time, it was kind of the introduction to a lot of not only baseball, but a lot of other sports, the idea of data analytics being a competitive advantage. And I think, over time, more and more people get the data and acquire that data, and it stops being the competitive advantage that it was. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this conversation is we're kind of talking about character as the new competitive advantage, and something like you mentioned earlier, you and I are both extremely passionate about. And I appreciate you sharing so much and being generous with your time. One last question, Josh, to get you out of here on. You shared with me an awesome podcast on Toto Wolff and kind of the way that he runs the Mercedes F1 racing team. And I'm on my second run through on that podcast right now. An awesome podcast. Share just kind of like where you get other sources of inspiration outside of baseball.
Yeah, that podcast is it's one I've listened to it several times as well. It's so rich in just wisdom and information and how he thinks. I certainly never ever thought that auto racing would be one of the avenues that I would answer a question like this with, but I think the whether it's Drive to Survive, the Netflix series that kind of opened behind the scenes um, to the rest of the world, but already the rest of us now realizing like F1 is this monster worldwide sort of phenomenon that has each race has as many viewers as like one Super Bowl and things like that. So I think that the reason that F1, not just Toto, but the sport that is so massive and it's on such a level of innovation, and the amount of resources poured into the way those teams operate. It would be easy to just watch a race and see Lewis Hamilton going faster on the track, and then they win and they change his tires every once in a while. And then you go like, I think, there's hundreds of people on like the front line of getting the car ready. There's R&D running simulations and analysis throughout a race. There's constant innovation going on throughout the season on these machines that they race at like unbelievable speeds at. And so that's why Toto, Mercedes, Toto Wolff, Mercedes, and F1 is so intriguing. It's like, how do you bring together this massive team of I think maybe even over 1,000 people that are trying to do one thing for two racers on a weekly basis. So it's that. I think that off of that, I definitely in the last several years, like the more and more kind of just sports aside, dive into like different things in psychology to, I think it helps with understand our decision-making processes. I think it helps to understand, what makes players tick. And, I've taken a course on Coursera online to kind of dive in a little deeper. And I'm, reading, papers and white papers and things like that I never really imagined I'd be, diving into that. That all relate to these different angles and things that we're constantly trying to solve for here.
Yeah, very cool. And like you said, that inspiration can come from anywhere, and it doesn't have to 100% equate to what you do in baseball, but it can sometimes stir something inside your head. Even I was taking notes while you were talking, just in terms of some things that happen in football that can be borrowed and even implemented from baseball. So, Josh, I thank you so much for spending the time here today, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. So did I, Evan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.